Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the May 17th, 2024 California Board of Behavioral Sciences meeting. My name is Chris Jones. I'm chairperson of the board. Before we convene, I would like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with administering and enforcing the board's laws. While protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. The Board of Behavioral Sciences will be holding this meeting in person and via WebEx platform. I will announce when we are accepting public comment on the various issues. For each public comment period, we will first be accepting comments from the participants in the audience present in the room. Then the moderator will open the lines as appropriate so that the remote audience members can comment. Each commenter will have 2 minutes to comment. Moderator, would you please provide the audience instructions on how they may participate during the meeting at the appropriate times?
This is the moderator. When public comment is requested, I will turn on the WebEx question and answer feature to facilitate this. Comments should be limited to the topic that is addressed during the specific agenda item. Instructions will be displayed on the screen each time, and members of the public on WebEx may click on the question mark, typically at the lower right-hand corner of their WebEx screen, type the word comment into the text box for their request to be recognized. You may also choose to raise your hand by clicking the hand icon at the bottom row of your computer's WebEx screen, or if you're an audio-only participant, you can raise your hand by pressing *3 on your device. You'll be given 2 minutes to speak with a 15-second warning, and at that time, your microphone will be muted, and we'll move on to the next individual's requested public comment.
Thank you, moderator. Members, during the roll call, please introduce yourself and let the public know whether you are a public or a licensed member. Christina, would you please call roll so we can establish a quorum?
Good morning. Dr. Nick Boyd,
Good morning, licensed professional clinical counselor.
Abigail Ortega,
Present, licensed clinical social worker.
Justin Huft,
Present, licensed marriage and family therapist.
Chris Jones,
Present, LEP member, chair, pronouns are he, him.
Wendy Strack,
Wendy Strack, public member, vice chair of the board.
John Sovak,
John Sovak, LMFT. My pronouns are he, him.
Susan Friedman,
Susan Friedman, public member.
Kelly Ranasinga,
Present, public member, pronouns he, him.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Present, public board member, pronouns she, her.
Eleanor Uribe.
Present, licensed clinical social worker.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Christina. Next on the agenda are introductions. Board staff, would you please introduce yourselves?
Good morning, Steve Sodergren, an executive officer.
Good morning, Marlon McManus, assistant executive officer.
Roseanne Helms, legislative manager for the board.
Sabina Knight, legal counsel for the board. Sorry, I was seeing if Christy Berger was going to jump in there.
I'll go ahead and jump in. Christy Berger, regulatory manager for the board.
Christy Shields, regulations counsel for the board and assisting with coverage for Ms. Knight later in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's time for the public to introduce themselves if they would like. This is voluntary. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to introduce themselves?
Leah Brew, she, her pronouns. I'm an LPCC, a counselor educator, and a former board member. So when I speak today, I will be coming from that perspective.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay, good morning. I'm going to pick this up. My name is Shanti Ezrin. I'm with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Daniela Bermudez. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here representing Postpartum Support International today. Thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, good morning. Ben Caldwell, MFT.
Welcome.
Good morning, G. Viers with Gentle Rivers Consulting. I'm the legislative advocate for CalPIC, California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors.
Welcome. All right, are there anyone in our remote audience that would like to introduce themselves, moderator?
This is the moderator. I've opened up the question and answer feature, or if you would like to raise your hand, you can to introduce yourself. All right, I have Kathy Atkins. I'll request to unmute.
Good morning, everyone. This is Kathy Atkins with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. All right, next on our agenda is the board chair report. Board meeting attendance. The report shows the board member attendance and board meetings for committee members during the last fiscal year. Please let staff know if you believe there are any errors. As a reminder, attendance at the board and committee meetings is very important. Future board meetings, you'll see in the materials the list of the upcoming board meetings. And then we have one last item. Is she here?
Actually, can I interject?
Well, sure, I guess you
Please. Since this is the time we do staff kind of recognitions and such, there's a recognition that Chris will be giving in a few minutes. But I wanted to take a moment to recognize, although it's a little bit latent, some 25 years of service. We had gone through the process. There's a couple of our employees that have been around for 25 years of state service, and we were finally able to get some awards for them. So I just wanted to actually present those. Unfortunately, there's only one of the people that are here, and the first one I'm going to award is to Christina Kitamura of 25 years of amazing service. So I can bring it to you later. Oh, she come up here and take a picture. Come on up. What the? No, okay, that's fine. We'll do it later. Thank you for your service. Cynthia Burnett, who is our cashiering and exam manager, has been with the state for 25 years, and Cynthia chose to get a watch from the state. It's a really nice California state watch. And we have Raquel Pena. She's an enforcement analyst in our complaint analyst within the board, 25 years again, and I believe she actually got a bracelet. Thank you, Raquel. And also Dawn Herrera, 25 years. Dawn is our budget analyst, and she works with facilities and such. And I actually think most of which is kind of cool, is most of the state service for all these individuals have been with the board. I don't think I'm wrong in stating that. So we are happy to have them, and thank you very much for all the good work you do, and we appreciate you. So round of applause. Oh yeah.
All right, thank you, Steve. I see that our next distinguished guest is online. So we would like to acknowledge Yvette Caceres Willis, Evie, for faithfully serving the board since being appointed in February of 2021. Evie, I would like to present you with this resolution.
Thank you.
It says, Yvette Evie Caceres Willis faithfully served as a member for the California State Board of Behavioral Sciences from February 3rd, 2021 to March 31st, 2024. And whereas throughout her years of service, she gave fully of herself and her ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas she discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon herself and the board, and whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their high esteem and regard. Now, therefore, be it resolved this 17th day of May, 2024, that the members of the California State Board of Behavioral Sciences express heartfelt appreciation to Yvette Caceres Willis for her outstanding contribution she made during her term of service to the board. Thank you, Evie, for all your hard work with the board. We wish you luck, and we'll miss your engaging presence at our meetings.
Thanks, Chris.
If you have a few words for us, Evie?
Yes, I do. I didn't prepare a speech or anything, but I'd love to just talk from the heart because this has been the most amazing experience. I'd never done anything like this before. And the service that I provided to the people from California has meant so much to me. So I'd like to thank the Office of the Governor. When I accepted this appointment, there couldn't have been a better time. It was right in the midst of a global pandemic, and I knew that this was so important. I want to also thank DCA and, of course, my fellow and esteemed colleagues on the board. Learned so much from you, especially all the clinicians. Being a public member was a challenge, but it was a challenge that I accepted, and I will never regret it. And I'm a better person for knowing all of you. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional because saying goodbye is hard, but I make this vow to all of you. I will continue to advocate for mental health services, and I will continue to support with everything that I have. And I want to thank all of you, especially Steve and Christina, for all that you've done. Please keep in touch. If you're in Northern California, just look me up, and I'd love to keep in touch with all of you. And best of luck, and keep doing the good work. Thanks.
Thank you, Evie. Good luck to you too. Appreciate it. All right. We have one more staff recognition. That one you want me to? Oh, I can do it. Okay. All right. All right. We want to congratulate Lydia Va on achieving 5 years in state service. Lydia is a registration evaluator for the board. Congratulations, Lydia, and thank you for being a valued member of the board. For Lydia. Thank you. She's probably upstairs working hard. All right. Next on our agenda is the Department of Consumer Affairs update. Yvonne Durantes from DCA's Legislative Affairs will be presenting an update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. Yvonne, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can you hear me all right? Great. All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Yvonne Durantes. I'm with Board and Bureau Relations here at the Department of Consumer Affairs, and I'm happy to provide you an update here today. I have quite a bit of updates, but if there's anything that needs to be repeated, happy to repeat anything. And also a lot of this information will also be located on our monthly email that's sent out to board presidents and vice presidents. So just getting started, we did just celebrate Public Service Recognition Week last week, May 5th through May 11th. And in honor of public service recognition, we honored more than 3,000 DCA board and bureau employees dedicated to protecting Californians. And so along the same lines, we'd like to thank you for your service and all that you do to protect Californians as well. Moving on to our meet and greet with Secretary Moss on April 30th, DCA hosted an in-person meeting with the new secretary and with executive leaders. And this served as an opportunity for DCA leaders to meet our new secretary and hear her vision and priorities for business, consumer services, and housing agency, as well as for the department. Moving on to licensee scam alert. DCA has learned of a recent increase in scams targeting licensees though the nature of scams varies, they are similar in a way that they involve individuals falsely identifying themselves as board employees and telling licensees that they are under investigation. The scammers attempt to gather personal or financial information and may even demand payment. And so boards are urged to be vigilant and proactive in providing licensees with tips on how to avoid scams. Moving on to our diversity, equity, and inclusion update. On April 5th, DCA's DEI Steering Committee held its quarterly meeting. The committee reviewed and discussed the member application process, establishing subcommittees, and solicited input from the committee on how to expand language access, workforce development, and advance DEI in the remainder of 2024. The next committee meeting will be held on July 26th. And if you do have any ideas that you'd like for the committee to consider, we welcome them, and we ask that you please let your executive officer know or reach out to myself. And as a reminder, DCA's learning management system has many DEI-related trainings available for you. They're available for you at your own pace. So whenever you'd like to take them, and they are self-paced. So if you want to take 30 minutes of them and then continue it, you're welcome to do so. If you do have any questions about your password or anything, I am happy to assist with that. Moving on to outreach, DCA's Office of Public Affairs staff participated in 2 Facebook Live events hosted by the Consulate of Mexico's for both Sacramento and Fresno offices during the Financial Education Week. Staff presented on Get to Know DCA in Spanish and shared a broad overview of consumer and licensing information. And in addition, DCA joined an in-person resource event with the Consulate of Mexico here in Sacramento for another Get to Know DCA event. There is also another DCA event that just recently happened as well. It was a virtual event, and it happened with the Consulate of Mexico in San Bernardino, and this was on May 14th. And so we will be continuing this partnership with consulates, and we'll be looking forward to future events and partnerships, especially to share additional information on licensing and consumer resources. Additionally, in the coming months, DCA will be developing workforce development outreach opportunities for all boards and bureaus to participate. And so we look forward to sharing additional information on that for you as well. Moving on to some housekeeping items. I want to touch base on your travel expense claims. And so as the fiscal year comes to an end, we ask that you please submit your travel expense claims as soon as possible and no later than Wednesday, June 7th. Claims submitted after this date will still be processed. However, the State Controller's Office will not issue any payments until after July 5th. All travel expenses and advances must be submitted for travel on or after July 1st, and those will be processed for payment after the budget is signed. And so if you do have any additional questions in regard to travel or travel claims, please feel free to reach out to me. Moving on to a board member orientation training. If you have been appointed or reappointed within the last year and have not already completed your board member orientation training, the next one that's coming up is June 18th. And it will be a virtual all-day event. And so this training is required for you to remain in compliance. And so if for whatever reason you're not able to make that one, we will be having another one this year, which is October 22nd, I believe. And so please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or you're not sure if you've already taken it or still need to take it. Because I know sometimes some members just forget when was the last time they took it. So I'm happy to go over your training transcript with you and let you know of any trainings that you're still missing. And just wanted to touch base as well on our Form 700. We just want to thank you for your participation and submission of we are at nearly 100% compliance. So that is pretty incredible. So thank you all so much, and happy to answer any questions or repeat any information at this moment.
Thank you, Yvonne. Are there any questions from our board? Any questions from our audience? Any questions from our remote participants? Moderator?
This is the moderator. The direction of the board. I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please use the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Appreciate the time. All right, next on our agenda is the Workforce Development Committee update. Steve, would you please provide us with a report?
Yes. So the Workforce Development Committee met on April 9th, and we were very busy that day. Some of the things we discussed were permitting applicants for licensure to take the required clinical exam after completing 1,500 hours of postgraduate supervised experience. The committee directed staff to begin drafting language and consult with legal for direction on what will be proposed in statutes and regulations. And then we'll keep continuing this conversation, I believe, at the Workforce Development Committee then. There was a presentation and kind of an overview done on the study we're doing with additional coursework requirements for the board's regulated license types for all applicants who hold an in-state degree. And the intent of the overview was to help form a basis for a holistic review for all additional coursework requirements for consistency, clarity, and relevance. And the first one we actually took a stab at was the human sexuality coursework requirement for all of board's regulated types. So we started discussing that. I would, if you're interested, definitely look at that committee material. There's an excellent chart that Christy Berger had presented that really explains all the different coursework and when they need to be fulfilled. So additionally, we talked about proposed amendments to the board's English as a second language for additional exam time allowance. And the committee directed staff to discuss the language and fine tune it, and then bring the proposal to the Policy and Advocacy Committee for consideration. We also talked about the update on licensure pathway survey. The data was collected. We had a pretty good response rate. Now we have to weed through the data and come up with some report for that. So there's a lot of data to go through, so it should be interesting to see what we come up with. And lastly, we did an update on the implementation of a voluntary demographic survey for candidates taking board-developed exams. We're still consulting with legal on that, kind of seeing where we can move forward on that proposition. So next meeting will be August 9th, 2024. Any questions?
Have we determined a time for that meeting?
Oh, the time? I don't know if we're having two committee meetings on that, but I don't know the time yet. Do we have it down?
We're having two committee meetings on that day. Policy and advocacy will also be that day, so we'll have to get schedules and figure that out.
We kind of weigh out too, looking at the agenda and how much is going to be on there and kind of have to weigh that out. So would you prefer it? Morning or afternoon?
No, I just really need to know what time we're meeting online. Thank
We'll
you.
get that out soon then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions or comments from our audience? How about from our remote audience?
This is the moderator. At the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. All right, and seeing no requests, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, next on the agenda is the presentation on making policy decisions. Steve, would you please provide us with the presentation?
Yes, I will. So in this presentation today, I'm going to be outlining the process, how staff identify bills that we're going to be discussing within the board meetings. And I'm going to outline the important factors you may take into what we take into consideration when making kind of those selections, and what maybe you might think about when making considerations or opinions on what kind of positions you want to take on a bill. I will go over the different types of positions that can be made on a bill proposal and the factors to consider, what questions you can ask yourself when you're kind of preparing for the board meetings on what opinions that you want to form. I know it might be kind of basic, but I think it's good, kind of a refresher. You would have received this in your board training through DCA. It's within our board manual. There's a nice chart you'll see partway through that kind of gives you a matrix of the types of positions we can take and what that means. So just wanted to go through quickly, just kind of as a refresher. So first slide, please. Great, thank you. So when I'm going to use the word staff here, but really it's Roseanne and partially me and then partially the board, but mostly Roseanne. So just take that in consideration, all the work that's done. So in late January and February, board staff will track bills that are being introduced and will consider whether the bills fall kind of into three categories is what we're looking at. We'll look at if bills will directly impact any of the professions that the board oversees, And what we're looking for is, will these bills increase, limit, or alter the board's statutory authority in some way? We will also kind of tease out bills that directly affect the board itself. And those involve amendments to general codes that we already have, or laws that change or influence the board administrative functions. An example of that would be last year we had the name change, the dead name bill. That's kind of one of those types of bills. And lastly, just bills that we think might be interesting for the board to take a position on or to look at. And these are usually proposed amendments to laws aiming to enhance consumer protection overall or improve access to mental health services in some way. So sometimes you'll see we kind of hesitate on doing anything with like Medi-Cal billing and stuff, but if it kind of meets something that we think that could actually help, we will present that to the board. Now you can go forward. So after kind of identified, it's a huge list usually, because there's a lot of bills. At least this year there was a ton of bills being proposed. We will take that list and then we'll kind of look at that list again. And when we're looking at it, we'll take many things into consideration. And we'll begin, we'll take many things into consideration, and that's, actually I kind of went over this slide already. Does it affect our, I apologize. I had it all, my presentation was all written out. Now I can't, maybe I'll have to go on the fly here. So what happens? We have that list. And one of the things we do take into consideration, I think I forgot to mention, was if the bill would actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to go back. Let's go here. What we do after we have that list is after we have that list, then Roseanne will start working with the legislature and the author's office. She'll get the bill analysis, and we'll start presenting our actual board material to be presented at the Policy and Advocacy Committee. And at the Policy and Advocacy, for the Policy and Advocacy Committee, we will basically talk about this analysis. And that's the first time that the board will actually take a look at what kind of opinions what kind of policy decisions they want to make. Do they want to support or oppose the bill, support and amend, or what kind of policy decision they want to take? You want to chime in? Or
Also, one thing that the Policy and Advocacy Committee is great for is what other questions do the members have that maybe would be helpful at the board meeting to make a final decision. So we try to gather as much of that information so that we can do some more research as well.
And so this is the May meeting. So in the April meeting, the Policy and Advocacy Committee will, make some suggestions, and those will come to the May meeting for the board to review and look at. And next slide. And so the question is, why do we take positions on the bills? Since the board is considered the expert for its respective profession, the board's position on a bill that impacts license or registration holds really significant weight. Positions can be seen as signals to the legislator that a bill's proposal is sound or may need some improvement. And when discussing bills, I think what really it's a good practice is to consider your position before entering into the bill discussion. So kind of have that in your mind when we start talking about the bills. And to assist in helping you informing you in a position, staff will prepare out the potential effects of the proposed legislation might have on consumer protection, licensees, and the board as a whole. That's definitely consumer protection is an easy thing to think about. Licensees also, how that may affect the profession and such. The one thing that kind of we also look at that's not mentioned too much, it's our last consideration is, can we implement the bill? Do we have the board resources or not? Because we want to make sure if we are supporting a bill that we can actually help implement it and it will succeed. Staff members will propose, actually, we're starting to do this. We're starting to propose recommendations to the board. And those are grounded in comprehensive analysis of the bill and its potential ramifications on the current policies. To craft the bill analysis, we take some considerations for the consumer is the first one. Can you move the slide, please? Go forward, sorry. There we go, thank you. So we take the consumer into consideration. We question whether the bill enhances consumer safety, access, awareness to the protections that are offered to them through our laws. And we also take in the possible negative effects that could happen. Will the bill increase consumer costs? Or will it create inefficiencies that currently do not exist with for access and such? We also take the licensees into consideration. Next slide. We question whether the bill maintains a minimal competency standard without increasing burden or cost to the licensee. We'll also look at whether the bill is being promoted by trade associations, and we'll consider the intent of the trade association. Also, it's considered whether there might be a better way to achieve the bill's goals. Next, please. While the consumer and licensees are the main focus of the analysis, like I said, we must also consider the implications of the bill could have on a board operations. We consider whether the bill will increase cost or whether the board has the necessary authority or resources to implement the bill's goals. Next, please. So those are considerations that we take into account when we actually, Roseanne, does the bill analysis and presents the material. But those are also considerations that you should be taking into account too when forming your opinion. So I think offering the staff opinions kind of gives you a direction to look at, maybe something to think about, and then you can focus on, maybe help to focus a little bit better. So we are beginning to offer those recommendations. You'll see them in our slide material coming up in the next, when we're talking about bills, they'll be there. And those can be used to make motions. So just as a heads up. So going through really the possible positions, this is the chart that we have. I believe it is in an addendum to the board member manual. It's kind of a helpful guide to look at. And we can just go through the possible positions that you could take when looking at a bill. Next, please. So if a bill does not elicit any concerns as written in your mind and could promote consumer protection or benefit the licensees and could support our board objectives that we're looking at currently, then a support position is appropriate. When we take a support position, staff will then draft a letter to the author claiming our support. And then we will actually work with the author to get that bill passed. The next one, please. On support if amended, we're looking at the bill, and overall the intent of the bill is something that we do believe will support the board's objectives, will help licensees, will maintain consumer protection. But for some reason, the language there could be language that could enhance that, or there needs to be some clarification. If you think that is the case, then support if amended is the appropriate one. And what we will do then, that's kind of interesting to look at it too, is what will happen if you make this position. So if it's support if amended, then the board staff will take that position and we will work with the board, we will work with the author's office to actually propose the enhancements to the wording of the bill, or work with them to get to that place where we could actually support the bill. And the next one, oppose unless amended. Really, if we see that there's some concern over if it's going to lessen consumer protection, if it's going to add increased burden to access or decrease access, add an increased burden to licensees, doesn't really necessarily fit within supporting our objectives as a board, But we do see that there's possible changes or enhancements could be made to the language that could get us to that, to possibly get us to accept it. Then we would, it's a stronger, you can, what?
So oppose unless amended is basically a little bit stronger, a stronger statement than support if amended. It kind of is meant to push them a little bit to make changes. If they are not willing to make the changes, the opposed position will remain. If they make the changes, it would convert to a neutral position.
Thank you. And then the last one, we can do neutral. And at that time, usually that's when if you don't have if we think that if the bill went through, it's not going to affect our board negatively or positively. Really, there's no effect for us. Usually on those neutral, I think on neutral, the other way to use a neutral too is if we see that a bill, you know, it might meet the board objectives, but we don't want to, we're not really strong about supporting it. We could also take a neutral position and see, or we might want to wait until we see what happens with the bill later on. That's another way to look at the neutral position. Would you like to add something on that?
Yeah, sometimes that can be used if the board feels it's not really a good policy, but they don't want to necessarily oppose it. The board might choose just to stay neutral.
And once again, yeah, that's because we do want to take that in consideration. Once again, if we oppose a bill that does carry some weight to it, so we want to use that judiciously. We don't want to, you know.
Christy wants to say something.
I would just add that think carefully about that position, because if you take a neutral position, then you're not really part of the policy making. My experience has been that if you want to have a stake in the policy, you need to take either an affirmative support or an opposition position to have a voice in the policy. So it's a question of whether you're really interested in the policy that's being proposed. Because if you're interested, neutral isn't going to really involve you in the process. That's been my experience anyway. I don't know if that staff would disagree, but.
No, I think that's definitely legit. I'm almost, only one more slide. No. Conclusion. So just to kind of go over that, just remember that the positions that that our board takes can be very impactful on how a bill moves through the process. And while the staff may make recommendations, we just wanted to clarify that we do take a lot of stuff into consideration, all the things that are necessary. But once again, that is just a staff recommendation, and it's really the board's final decision on what kind of position they want to take. And kind of above all in all these, as we stated at the beginning of the meeting, consumer protection is really the highest consideration that we must take with all bills. So thank you for listening. Any questions? Yes, Susan.
This question is really much more for Roseanne. Roseanne, I'm curious how many boards, aside from our board, participate in this, usually in the bills, for example, that we got in our packet today? And secondly, how come none of the bills that we got in the packet today had a position taken by the Policy and Advocacy Committee? I was curious about that.
So a couple of different reasons. A lot of boards and within DCA take positions on legislation. There are about 40. Well, boards can take a position. Bureaus typically do not take.
No, I really meant on the specific bills that we take a position on. Are there other boards that are also taking a position on them?
If they affect DCA generally, then yes, that might affect all the boards. A lot of the mental health related bills, no. Other boards, if they're not a mental health board, will not, except for possibly psychology board. If there's sometimes an intersection where we will be analyzing some of the same bills, not always, but sometimes there's some in common. And the policy and advocacy, there were a lot of bills that were really fairly early on in the process. Not a lot of amendments had been made yet. There were some large questions sort of looming. So we used that as more of an information gathering. What feedback did the committee have? What would they like to, what more information would they like to see for the board meeting? So that's why you saw that, that they did not recommend a lot of positions for today.
That's good.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Sorry, any other questions from the board? Any questions from our audience? Any questions from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. All right, and seeing no requests, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Okay, next on the agenda is the discussion and possible action regarding the acceptance of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists Regulatory Board's clinical examination for California licensure. Roseanne?
Thanks, Chris. So the board is sponsoring SB 1024 this year. The board approved the amendments that are currently in the bill.
Oh, sorry. This is the MFT 18. I think yeah, 18. That's me.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. You can take it.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
My script says
Sorry.
Roseanne, so.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. No. Hold on here. Sorry there. Let me reposition there. Okay. So I'm bringing to you today, we've been talking about the Marriage and Family Association of Marital and Family Therapy. I keep putting Marriage and Family Therapy exam in there, but I apologize for that. It's Marital and Family Therapy Regulatory Board Clinical Exam. So we've been having the discussion of whether to accept this for national licensure in California. I mean, for licensure in California. Currently, right now, to become licensed in California as an LMFT, you have to take a law and ethics exam, and then you have to take a clinical exam. The clinical exam is currently developed in conjunction with OPES by the board. So we put that exam out. And the LMFTs are the only license type currently that are having a board clinical exam administered. Well, the LEPs also have a board clinical exam, board administered clinical exam. So the licensed and clinical social workers take a national exam, and so do the LPCCs. They take the National Clinical Mental Health Counseling Examination, and the LCSWs take the Association of Social Work Board's clinical exam. And I gave you a little history in the background of that. Really, this discussion started in 2009. We had an exam review committee that was convened, and we were looking at not only the issue, it wasn't really the issue of clinical exams, there was a bunch of different things that we were looking at. And one of the items that came out of that is reviewing the AMFTRB exam for possible acceptance as for California licensure. And so at that time, we partnered with a third-party company to do an evaluation of the exam. And kind of the history of that, really beginning then, and their analysis of the exam itself was, there was at that time some really kind of administrative issues at the time of the exam, because California does have one of the largest populations of MFTs in the nation, and so transferring into that might have caused some issues. As you know, we actually, in 2015, we wanted to go back and kind of look at the exam again. That really got delayed for various reasons. Everything from waiting for the OPS to complete their analysis of our occupational analysis of our exam, and waiting for AMFTRB to complete an occupational analysis of their exam, because that would actually give a better study of the exam itself if we had that material. COVID came into play, we kind of delayed that. And as you know, we brought this back in 2022 made a presentation to say, let's look at this again. Do we want to accept this exam for licensure? A couple things came out of that, as you know. It was a very, at that time, we were having discussions about the ASWB exam and the pass rates there. At the same time, there wasn't at that time really a sense that we wanted to move forward with it. So when OPES did complete back in 2022, that report that OPES had presented really came up with their concerns were, it had to deal with the differences in measurement of competency. There was the administrative portion of it. And then also, it wasn't really necessarily in their report, but at that time, we were looking at the differences or the pass rates or using standardized exams for clinical exams. In the meantime, we've been working with AMFTRB, and I know the board, we've had some other discussions about this. And so through those discussions we've been having with AMFTRB, I feel pretty positive about kind of them addressing the issues that we had raised. And I've put some in the material. You can read kind of a synopsis of that. But for the first, for the content requirements, the concern was that it may not, that the AMFTRB exam really tests kind of a general application of LMFT, the profession, and California is more specific to California. And they are open to exploring, how to include, the California content. One idea that was brought up, which we might even explore, is working with our data bank of questions and actually using some of those for incorporation into the national exam. That's one of those. So that I feel kind of positive that might help to bridge the gap of that competency questions. Additionally, with the administrative concerns that we had, currently right now for the national exam, it's given once a week for every month and scores are held. But I know through our conversations with AMFTRB, they would be open to considering a different type of scheduling. So it would just be a matter of working out the logistics and making sure that in that instance that there's enough questions in the data bank to actually do a more frequent testing schedule. And lastly, the concerns over, standardized testing and the possible bias they actually are looking at that, and they do collect demographic information that they utilize for diff analysis, which is something that, we are pursuing ourselves, but it might take a while for us to be able to actually do that for our own exam. They are also considering, alternate forms of how to take the exam or how the exam is structured. So it's nice that they're pursuing that. It's a little bit more than we're doing or maybe can do right now. So that makes me feel good about that. I don't know if it makes you feel good, but for me, it makes me feel good. So once again, just as you know, the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, they are supporting this, and they represent, I think it's around 30,000 licensees, which we have about 50,000 LMFTs. And once again, that is the largest population in the nation. And what I'm presenting here, I'd like to open it for discussion, but at this time, I'm presenting a motion where if you would like to, pursue this, the AMFTRB clinical exam for licensure, what the motion is structured around is you would ask staff to look at, what we have to do legislatively and with our regulations and start working on that. But the final approval of saying we're going to enter into this would be, there's the three things that I have kind of laid out there, or four things that would have to be done before really saying, giving the final stamp of approval. And that would be working with legal counsel to draft any language that's necessary. And we would collaborate with AMFTRB to look at the content and measurement scope concerns, collaborate with them on the actual accessibility of the exam and how often and what that's going to look like, and see if we can increase that. And then another important part of that too is making sure that we actually have the system functions ready to be able to handle that, so we're not negatively affecting any candidates and we can smoothly transition over. I know that they are actually willing to work towards that, but I think giving that stamp of approval that we are looking at wanting to pursue that, or we want to pursue this, we can start working on that. And then what the idea is, we would bring reports back to you. I'd report back during the next meetings or next year about what is happening with those 4 points and how we're pursuing on those. So any questions? Or I'll
Thank
let
you,
take
Steve.
over.
Thank you. Are there any members that would like to make a motion based on the staff recommendations? Sure.
I have a question. Since you said there's so many more LMFDs from California than there are any other place in the country, would they be able to accommodate the huge number that would suddenly be part of what they had to deal with?
And that's something that would be one of the things we would work on to make sure that that does happen, that before we would go forward, we'd want to make sure that.
Justin?
Is the motion as written the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay.
And unless you want to change it, you can make whatever motion that you'd like. This one is just recommended by the staff.
Okay. Justin Huft, I motion to conduct an open discussion as to whether the board will accept the AMFRTB national examination for licensure.
Actually, sorry, the recommendation. So there is a motion. There should be a. Let me look in the paperwork here.
The motion would be to accept the DMFT, the national exam, and direct staff to take the necessary steps to implement the examination.
Actually, you can't read the slide, but that's really. Oh, yeah, right in front of you.
I motion to accept the AMFTRB national exam for licensure in California and direct staff to complete all the following steps before requesting final board approval to run regulatory and/or legislative amendments to formally accept the AMFTRB national examination by the board.
Kelly Renisinger, I'll second the motion. Ask that we open discussion.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Are there any comments or questions from our board members? Abigail?
So I guess for me, like, I was reading, like, the benefits with the portability and all of that, and I see what the benefits are, but I still see, right, that there are a lot of biases. So, like, not everyone gets to enjoy those benefits, right, because we still haven't addressed the possible biases and the testing. So it's like, I know you went over what they're going to do. One of the things you said is they're going to collect demographic numbers. I would like to see something more elaborate, right? If we're going to shift to that national exam, because then we're just going from like one biased exam to another. And not everyone gets to enjoy that. So it's unfair.
No, I hear you. And definitely, and the one thing I do like about, they are doing a lot of work for that we aren't currently, I'm not sure we can even have the resources to pursue, but they are looking at, not only do they collect the information to actually do the diff analysis, but they are actually looking at, different ways to construct an exam or possibly give an exam. So that is working towards, how to make everything accessible and more, equitable. So I think that's the one plus to another plus.
Yeah, but we don't have that yet. So we're going to move forward without like having received any of those changes or data.
Well, that's what we can discuss in when we're reporting. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the recommendation includes looking at that.
Yeah.
That's part of the recommendation so this vote is just to put together the legislation to look at those types of recommendations that are listed there.
I don't think you're thinking.
Justin?
So we don't have the differential item functioning, but we do have pass rates by race and by gender, and they are not exactly what we would want, but they're close enough that I think that I feel comfortable moving forward to look at this.
Yeah, and I think it's because in the recommendation, the first word I see is that we're accepting. And that doesn't sound like conversation or open. It sounds like I'm accepting something that I right now don't see like how it's equitable.
And you can reflect that in your vote.
Yeah.
Wendy?
Just for clarification on the drafted recommendation and the one that's been made here, I'm assuming based on Abigail's comments there that if we can't, if something comes up in the process when we're working with legal counsel or collaborating on the acceptance of the exam, if there are hurdles that pop up along this process, we'll be aware of those, and at any point we could change course, right? Like this isn't locking us in forever at this point.
Christy?
Christy Shields, counsel for the board. I want to point out also that Business and Professions Code Section 139 requires us to have a valid examination, and a biased examination is not a valid examination. So we're going to need to meet that hurdle legally anyway. So I think that's part of the motion that is before the board, because we can't legally adopt an examination, whether it's national or the board's own examination, without meeting that minimum legal standard for the examination in California.
And OPS did determine that through their evaluation that that met the standards. So,
Kelly?
I was going to say something, but I'm going to ignore that. From a practical standpoint, I think we need to have a chip in the game to talk. So, and I empathize with Board Member Ortega's concerns because the semantics of the recommendation seem to say we want it. We are accepting it, but I think it's practically a longer discussion. And frankly, at least they're looking at demographic data. If they were not, I think it would be an opposition vote from me. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. John?
Maybe in consideration of this, the language is a little bit too directive. I agree with Abigail on this. Can we shift it to move toward accepting as to get these action items moving, but take this word accept out of there? Because I do find that challenging, because I do want to make sure that we do have the ability to put the brakes on in the process if we discover things that are not supportive to what our board is trying to put out into the world and is not addressing the needs of LMFTs in the state of California. I think this accept thing is a little bit of a trip point for me.
I like the word explore. I accept to explore, right? Or discover.
Explore was just recommended by council
okay.
also. Like mind meld over here. Wendy?
A question for Steve, I guess. Does explore give us enough? I mean, because I think the point is to come to AMFTRB with the weight of California and the number of licensees in order to kind of push for the changes we're looking to see. So does explore get us that weight, or is that
I don't,
kind of on the sidelines?
in my personal opinion, no, it does not, because that's what we have been, is explore, but really to come to the table, I think, and to start, if you can call it, not necessarily negotiations, but saying, we're ready for this, we're going to move forward. I think we need to have that word accept, explore.
Do like conditional acceptance or something?
And I think that's what we were trying to do, is a conditional acceptance here. We're accepting the board we're accepting it for licensure, but we're not going to finalize that until these 4 things or 5 things we are assured that these are met, or that we feel good about those 4 type of items that we're looking at there. So it would be what I would imagine the iteration of this would be reports to the board saying, okay, we've worked with AMFTRB. This is the update on what we're working on. We're changing the exam, they're changing the exam accessibility. This is what it looks like if for the content, we would have possibly OPS look at the content again, see where it's at, giving you updates on that. So.
John?
If everything went absolutely smoothly, what is your projected timeline on this whole process moving?
It's a slow timeline. I haven't really thought too much. Like, in my mind, it's like 2 years, a year, 2 year possible.
Roseanne?
Legislation itself will take.
So we would work on drafting legislation and possibly the regulations over the next several months. We would need to work with legal counsel to determine what's necessary in legislation, what's necessary in regulation, and then draft that language for the board to review. The board would need to look at that language, and before it directed, the board would have to direct staff to either run successfully a legislative or a regulatory proposal before we could it would go into law that the AMFTRB exam was the exam that the board accepted. So with that being said, I would say the absolute quickest timeline, if we drafted language over the next several months, it's not going to be ready to go to run in January 2025. It would probably run in January 2026.
Mm-hmm.
The earliest it could probably go into effect is January 2027.
Yeah.
So then by taking this motion today, we're setting ourselves up to potentially propose in 26 and or 27. If we pull back the language, then we're looking maybe 27, 28.
Yes, we cannot do anything to accept the exam until it's going to be either via legislation or regulations, depending on what legal counsel says we need to actually make it official. I think that it's going to be a regulatory change with some legislative changes as well. And so that takes about if it was regulations, that still takes about a year to a year and a half to run. So we're looking at the same timeline if it's legislation or regulations, essentially.
And then Steve, as you start collaborating with AMFTRB, there are going to be opportunities for us to put the brakes on if these major concerns come up, because even OPS in their examination told us about some of the major concerns that they had with the exam. We will be able to put the brakes on and say, pause, we need this exact response, or we can't go forward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Kelly?
Here's what I think. If we want to talk to AMFT and say, these are the concerns we have for your exam, and we'd like you to do these things, well, why would they talk to us if we're not doing anything to implement their exam in our state? So I think a more concrete recommendation is probably the best thing for, at least for our licensees, because then we have some control and stake over, influencing potential public safety and all of our California stuff inside their exam.
And with that said, the motion is still on the table, and unless Justin wants to amend it, then that's what we move forward with.
I don't want to amend it, but I do want to echo that we have pretty comparable passing rates across race and gender, which I think is what many of us have expressed concerns about in previous meetings.
Yeah.
And we still have the opportunity to explore that as we move forward, which I think is a good thing.
Let me throw my voice in the ring here. I came into this conversation in 2020. I was appointed in 2021, and it was a very heated discussion. And I must say that given today's memo and report out by Steve, I gained a better understanding of the position of this conversation we're having around this big major shift. It's a big deal. It's not to be taken lightly. And again, Dr. Annette Walker, public board member, that's important for me to state that, because when we look at taking into consideration the consumers' possible interest in this matter, all the various stakeholders, as a public board member, I want to make sure that I am hopefully setting forward to them a better understanding of where we are. And Steve, I can't thank you enough because I really remember the conversation we had coming in. And I was curious to how long this conversation had been had. How long has it been going? So you offered that. And so I hope the public has had an opportunity to read this information. Given that information, it has kind of shifted my understanding of assessments, testing and measurements, which I do have a degree in at one level, at the master's level. So I understand how this works together. Standardized testing, personally, I would throw it out because I think the bias it exists. But the fact of the matter is we're not going to be doing away with testing anytime soon, the way that our system works and the way that the education branches connect with the work that we do. So the tests aren't going away, but to do the work as has been mentioned by some of the board members in addressing the bias issues, if we don't do that, then we're just continuing the definition of insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So at some point, somebody, some regulatory agency has to step up and stop the madness and stop continuing to just pass the baton. And we really don't make changes in these standardized tests. So although I support that conversation and that movement and making sure that we get those questions answered, I do, on the other hand of the equation, think that it's very important that we look at the support from CAMT, if I'm saying that right, CAMFT, which weighs now my privilege and right to vote on this matter, keeping the consumers' safety and our licensees, their needs in mind as we do our job as board members. So when I look at the support from CAMFT, from CAMP, what stands out to me the most in voting today is everything that they said, but particularly the last sentence, and hopefully everyone can see this, that they believe that adopting the AMFTRB examination will also assist in aligning California with national standards and eliminate inconsistencies. I do believe it's some of those inconsistencies that lead to biases in standardized testing. I personally I know what those are in my mind, having a master's degree in educational assessment, but when we look at testing across the board, it's important that we do take that into consideration, as well as the other issues that have been raised. But if now that we have the facts, knowing who has adopted this test and who has not, where California lives with LMFTs and their numbers in reach and in testing, and it's just very important that we look at take into consideration as a vote the support and why CAMP supports this and why. So I'm saying all this to say that I appreciate the background and the history on this matter, since this conversation has been going long before I made it to the board. So the importance of the board today taking an affirmative position, if you will, I get it. Because we seem wishy-washy. Are we in it? Are we out? It's like, we keep pausing and stepping the brakes, but I appreciate what Legal said earlier, and Steve too, and looking at the positions that we can take. We're not taking a neutral position on this because we have a lot at stake here, and we do have an interest. So I understand the language and accepting the AMFB. I understand that, but maybe it just needed to be articulated, Steve, why we use that particular language so that we don't get caught up in semantics. That statement makes a very strong position and where we are in moving the conversation forward. That's what that means. So I'm for adopting whatever language the board wants to agree to, but when I weigh my vote on this today, I'm really looking at the interest of the folks that would be impacted by us or not, or what we do with this test, adopting it or not.
Thank you.
Hope that makes sense.
Any other board comments? All right, can we have comments from our audience that are present?
Can everybody hear me okay? It's the struggles of being tall, so I have to pick up the mic. Okay, well, good morning. My name is Shanti Ezrin. I am the State Government Affairs Associate with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, CAMFT. Wanted to just start by thanking the board and staff for having this very important discussion today. So CAMFT is in strong support to adopt the AMFT-RB National Examination for Licensure in California. And we do really encourage the board to take action on next steps like staff recommended in Steve's report today. I'm going to go ahead and cover a couple of the points for why we are in such strong support of the adoption of the national exam in my comments today. So first is license portability. The goal is that each state has a general level of uniformity in regard to the required clinical exam for MFT applicants. This is something that would make obtaining licensure portability in the other 49 states much easier. Second is related to our workforce. So additional clinical exams, more courses, fees are financial and time hurdles for our therapists who want to obtain licenses in other states, but come from a state with a very different exam than the other 49 states. So adopting the national exam will eliminate the vast majority of these hurdles and significantly promote continuity of care for patients, and also supporting our workforce on a national level, frankly, at a time when therapists and client residents in multiple states is something that is a lot more common. Third is telehealth. So telehealth is something that is much more utilized, and we know it is something that is here to stay.
30 seconds.
Adopting the national exam will give therapists greater flexibility and also support those opportunities to expand their practice. And then fourth is federal advocacy and access to federal level jobs, which specify the national clinical examination requirements. So just in my last couple seconds here, all that being said, we do acknowledge the concerns with biases with the national exam that can cause unintentional disadvantages to certain candidates. We are committed to working with AMFT-RB and the BBS to explore the assessment analysis. And, you know, this is something that we do take very seriously, but it's important to stress that we need to put California MFTs in the best position possible to succeed and adapt to an evolving field. So we can take next steps now as it relates to regulatory amendments, and we can also work at the same time to address concerns raised regarding standardized testing. So I'm going to end just by encouraging the board to take action on next steps like staff recommended to get started to accept the AMFT-RB national exam for licensure in California.
Thank you.
Thank you. Try to put this back.
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, MFT. I'd also like to thank the board and staff for their diligent work on this over several years. I respectfully request your yes vote today to conditionally support a transition to the AMFT-RB exam. It seems that the differences between the exams are minor and resolvable, and the simple fact that AMFT-RB already engages in differential item functioning analysis, while OPES does not, means that the national exam is somewhat more accountable for issues of potential bias within the exam than the California MFT clinical exam is. I do share Board Member Ortega's and Dr. Walker's concerns. The AMFT-RB exam, like all clinical exams in mental health care, remains problematic in terms of demographic bias, and I continue to believe that the ideal policy solution in support of equity and public safety would be to remove the clinical exam requirement entirely, as clinical exams have never been demonstrated to correlate with safety or effectiveness in clinical practice. However, this proposed transition would ease portability and represent a meaningful step forward in accountability. This would be an imperfect change, but a good change. The conditions within the motion would allow you to put on the brakes if needed, and I respectfully request your vote in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Hi, Leah Brew. I also educate LMFTs. I just want to echo and make really simple that if we take a support position, then you can make changes to this exam to begin to address the diversity issues, which will affect 49 other states. You have an effect for the entire nation. And you're worried about consumer protection. Well, the other 49 states seem to have sufficient enough consumer protection using this exam. So I urge you to take a position of support so you can make changes to ensure that the other 49 states, in addition to our own, are more culturally competent when giving this test to the extent that's possible on an objective test. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Any further comments from the audience? Thank you, moderator. Do we have comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, you can either click that Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And we do have a request from, looks like they lowered their hand. Roger Smith, do you still want to speak? Okay. I'm going to request to unmute your microphone. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears. You'll be given 2 minutes to speak with a 15-second warning.
Very much. Yeah, my name is Roger Smith with the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Thank you for allowing me to speak. AMFT, although we have a similar name to the AMFTRB, AMFT is a separate organization and membership organization representing MFTs across the country and in California. AMFT fully supports CAMP's statements earlier, our friends at CAMP, and also the recommendation that the motion to go ahead and move forward with the AMFT-RB national exam in that process, removing going forward, remove a major barrier preventing California MFTs from becoming licensed in other states. Although some states do recognize the current California MFT exam, many states do not, and they will not be in the process, and they will not be changing. So adopting the AMFT-RB and ultimate AMFT-RB national exam ultimately will be very beneficial to MFTs going forward. In addition, while we recognize that racial bias in exams, not only the MFT national exam and the California exam, but other clinical exams in the mental health field, investing and going forward with this will be helpful for California MFTs and will allow the MFT profession in California and California MFTs to be competitive with other states, and while also allowing this particular board to work with AMFT-RB in improving the exam. Again, thank you very much for my comments and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Next, we have Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak and a 15-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Good morning, Kathy Atkins with CAMT. I wanted to thank the board for considering and discussing this transition and all the board members' comments today. Shanti highlighted, the vast majority of the reasoning behind our advocacy and request today, as well as it's laid out in our letter. I just simply wanted to underscore that we don't see any consumer protection value to have a separate and different exam from 49 other states, has sort of articulated by Leah. And with COVID and advancing technology, it's really pushed us with telehealth, license portability, and less barriers across the US when it comes to both provider and patient. And this transition is necessary to keep California MFTs on pace with other MFTs across the nation. While the discussion of standardized exams, benefits, and areas of improvement is absolutely ongoing and an important discussion, the fact is that an MFT clinical exam is still demanded by the 49 other states, and we have to allow our California MFTs the ability to compete and have parity and just frankly not be left behind as the nation moves forward with portability. CAMP has reached out to AMFT-RB as our own board of directors assessed and discussed this over the last couple of years. And I have to underscore that they've been very open to our questions, very transparent about concerns about exam quality and bias. And we've been happy with their response and dedication to continually improving this examination. And in order to have it's like Hamilton, in order to make a difference, you have to be in the room, you have to be at the table, and we cannot be at the table if we're not part of that exam. So for the reasons reviewed by Shanti, our letters and testimony of the last years, Ben Caldwell, Leah, AMFT, CAMFT is requesting the board to accept staff's recommendation to best support our California MFTs while ensuring the highest caliber of consumer protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, Christina, will you please take the vote?
Yes. Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Kelly Ranasinga,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Chris Jones,
Yes.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Dr. Nick Boyd,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. And I believe that has earned us a 10-minute break. So we'll see you guys back in 10 minutes. Okay, next on our agenda is discussion and possible action regarding amendments to board-supported legislation, Senate Bill 1024, Ochoa Bow, and Healing Arts Board of Behavioral Sciences. Roseanne?
Yes, now it's time for this one.
There you
So, SB 1024 is the main bill that the board is sponsoring this year. The amendments that are currently running in the bill were approved at a couple of different meetings. On November 17th, 2023, we approved the original language at the board meeting, and then on March 1st, 2024, the board approved some additional amendments. And so we've had some feedback from some stakeholders that would like to request a couple of different amendments or a couple of additional clarifying points. So we'll talk about those today. Currently, SB 1024 is proposing two changes to the board's practice acts, basically changes to the amendments to the requirements regarding the physical display of the license or registration to account for the use of telehealth, and then clarifying who qualifies as a supervisee for purposes of group supervision, which is limited to 8, and then also for purposes of the number of supervisees per supervisor in a non-exempt setting, which is currently limited to 6. There's some clarity concerns here that this bill is addressing. But stakeholders requested a couple of different amendments, and those are as follows. Regarding the number of persons supervised per supervisor in non-exempt settings in the language, a stakeholder has noted that the proposed amendment limiting individual or triadic supervisors in non-exempt settings to a total of 6 persons who are receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services in a non-exempt setting. It does provide clarification we're seeking, but there is one additional instance that can cause confusion. And they point out that if a supervisee is also overseeing licensees for their organization, but maybe it's only in a managerial role, not for purposes of supervision for licensure, it raises a question about whether the licensed person counts as one of the 6 supervisees, even if the licensed person is not receiving a board level of supervision that the board would expect towards licensure. So that to avoid that confusion, they're proposing that we make a clarifying amendments. I want to note that the same concern does not apply to the amendment that the bill is making to limit the group supervision to 8 persons receiving supervision in a group. In that instance, a licensee would be included, and the law makes that the clarifying amendment we're making already in the bill makes that clear, because they're taking up a spot in that group supervision that's meeting at a certain point in time. But for the requirement of limiting supervision to 6 persons per individual or triadic supervision, to make it only apply to we're proposing making it only apply to non-licensees, as the level of supervision provided for this population is generally different from organizational supervision provided to a licensed person. So there's a paragraph here that I've included in the memo text, as well as in attachment A. So basically it would be, we're changing the language to say it's limited to a total of not more than not more than 6 persons who are not fully licensed at the highest level for independent clinical practice and who are not receiving supervision providing clinical mental health services in a non-exempt setting. So for clarifying that, it's the basically we're saying licensees, but we're saying it a little bit more technically, that would make that distinction. The second proposed change, it was one that was brought up by Legislative Council and then tweaked slightly based on the feedback at the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. Leg Council had, when talking about the display of the license or registration, we had said it needs to be displayed in a conspicuous place in the licensee's primary place of practice. When seeing clients in person, Leg Council actually, and based on additional feedback from our Policy and Advocacy Committee, we proposed changing the language to it needs to be displayed when rendering professional clinical services in person, and that's more consistent with how the law discusses seeing clients. Seeing clients is a little more informal. So the Policy and Advocacy Committee reviewed the proposed changes at its April meeting, and it recommended one minor change to the rendering professional services, making it rendering professional clinical services. And so the language you see in attachment A is what is proposed for the amendments today. I actually had Leg Council draft it to make sure that there are no other recommendations that were going to come out after the fact that we needed additional board approval for. So the language that you see in attachment A, the proposed mock-up based on RN 14049 is the proposed changes that we're discussing for approval today.
Okay, thank you, Roseanne. I would like to motion that we direct staff to make any discussed changes and any non-substantive changes and to proceed with amending the proposed language into SB 1024.
Justin Huff, I second.
Thank you. Discussion from the board. Annette?
Just to clarify, I appreciate this, Roseanne. This is really good stuff. Visually, I'm a visual learner as well. So just for the sake of the amendments that you made and attachment A, can you show me where, or just tell me where this would be, where it would be highlighted? Thank you.
Attachment A, which starts on page 19-5, section 4980.31, the first paragraph, you'll see it in italics, rendering professional clinical services. On page, let's see, 19.8, the 1, 2, 3, I believe it's the 4th paragraph down under subdivision C, you'll see the language in italics there are not fully licensed at the highest level for independent clinical practice.
Okay,
And then we repeat that for each one. So there's another, because we have the 4 practice acts, those same changes are in the same related language for the other 3 practice acts there, and it's the same. Does that help?
It does. It does. But for the sake of future updates like this, would it be helpful to also show it in the actual attachment, just by bolding it or graying it out or something so that I can see where it lives?
Yeah, we usually we try to do this in color. The Leg Council, the way that they drafted it, it didn't come through in color. So next time I can highlight it. Usually it comes through that way.
Perfect.
Whether or not I have a printed copy, so I can't see it, the color anyways, but yeah, we can try to make that in color next time.
I think it would be helpful for the public as well to see that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. Any other comments from the board?
I have a comment. This is Eleanor Uribe.
Hi, Eleanor.
Hi. So I wanted to ask on the, let's see, let me find it on my, okay. Okay, so there is a reference to who are receiving supervision. So I just also wanted to let you know there's student interns receive supervision. So I don't want there to be any confusion later on. So I don't know if we may even want to say specifically those who are receiving supervision through the BBS or are associates. So that's just so that there's no more confusion.
But we went through a lot of iterations of this language when we were discussing it at committee, and there was a debate as does it include students, does it not, and not include students, does it include people that are receiving who are pursuing licensure at psychology board and things like that. So the thing that it really came down to is for public protection and to make sure that the supervisees in these particular instances don't have more supervisees than they can handle, either in the group or in the doing general supervision, that it's anybody providing receiving supervision for providing clinical mental health services. So I think that that's after the discussions that we've had, that makes it crystal clear. If you're doing supervision for providing clinical mental health services, you are limited to either 8 or 6, regardless of what they are, because there's all different kinds. There's people under the 90-day rule, there's people under psychology board, things like that. So all of those count.
Yeah, because I wouldn't necessarily say someone who's getting internship before they get their master's would be at the same level as someone who's already applied for the board of behavioral sciences to specifically get the clinical, because they could have a different supervisor. So a part of me wouldn't want like an intern to be counted as a person as part of that 8 group versus, you know, if they're just more kind of observing the process and they're learning, but they have maybe their own supervisor. I wouldn't want that to take up a space of somebody who is getting credit and for the BBS.
So if they're observing, they're not necessarily doing the active supervision. We're talking about somebody who's actively participating in the group, and that's what we're limiting to 8.
Yeah, because they can actively participate, but they're not getting hours, is what I'm saying. So there's a little bit of a distinction. So I mean, you don't want someone to go and say, hey, you can't participate. I just feel like there's a little bit of a distinction that you might want to consider, just so that we don't come back here and say, okay, now we have this other question. So I was just saying somehow if it has to do with, say, someone who's actively getting licensing hours, because I mean, the students that are interns are not getting licensing hours, at least the social workers. So
If they're not getting hours, then it doesn't count as supervision.
so is there that distinct?
I'm sorry, if I may, I think that students that are getting, trainees that are in the field being supervised by on-site supervisors are doing clinical work, even though they're not necessarily now being overseen by the board. I would be cautious to not include that, given that is time and supervision that the supervisor's having to give, and to make sure that they're getting quality supervision. We should certainly keep the language the way it is, given that they are providing care in many cases.
Yeah, the conversation in committee was that it should count them in group, and because they're taking a spot in the group. So we don't want the group to have 20 trainees in it and be, you know, the supervisor needs to be able to hear all of the cases and concerns in that hour or 2 hours that they're given and make. So that's why we made the clarification.
Is that good, Eleanor?
I understand. I just don't want to see students, interns excluded, you know, because of that. So that's all.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the board? All right, comments from our in-person audience? Any comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon or use the raise hand function. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. All right, Christina, will you take the vote?
Yes. Dr. Nick Boyd,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Kelly Rana Singer,
Yes.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe.
Yes.
Sorry, was that a yes or?
Yes, that was a yes.
Motion carries.
There's two. Gotcha. Okay. All right. Thank you, Christina. Next on the agenda is discussion and possible action regarding Assembly Bill 941, Waldron, Controlled Substances, Psychedelic Assisted Therapy. Roseanne.
Yes, so AB 941 would create a work group to study and make recommendations to establish a framework for the therapeutic use of certain psychedelic plants and fungi. Once the framework is enacted via the legislature, the bill then states that it permits the use of specified substances to be used for psychedelic assisted therapy. So under existing federal law, there are 5 schedules of controlled substances, and they establish under federal law Schedule 1 drugs, which they state in the law have a high potential for abuse, no currently acceptable medical use in treatment in the United States, and a lack of accepted safety for the drug under medical supervision. And then that law goes on to state which drugs are considered Schedule 1 drugs, and that includes several drugs, including psilocybin and ibogaine. So for this particular bill, it requires the California Health and Human Services Agency, or HHS, to convene a work group of specified members to study and make recommendations to establish a framework governing psychedelic assisted therapy utilizing psilocybin and ibogaine, and then any other controlled substance that the FDA might approve in the future for use, including dimethyltryptamine or mescaline, among others. So the work group is tasked with studying specified subjects to make this particular determination on psychedelic assisted therapy. The work group needs to develop policy recommendations regarding development of a statewide training program for psychedelic assisted therapy, a statewide credentialing process, educational campaigns, how to minimize use-related risks, equitable access and use and delivery of the controlled substances that would be used, and things like that. And then it says it's the intent of the legislature to decriminalize the specific substances if they are transferred without financial gain in the context of psychedelic assisted therapy once the legislature adopts a framework governing this therapy. The work group is required to submit a report of its findings and recommendations to the legislature by January 1, 2026. And then the bill states that upon legislative enactment of this framework, that the use of hallucinogenic or psychedelic substances for psychedelic assisted therapy shall be lawful. And so in terms of what this bill is trying to do, the intent language notes that the author is seeking to establish a framework for the clinical use of psychedelics so that this type of therapy may be used to help those for whom conventional therapy has not worked. It's following in the footsteps of a couple of other states which have done various efforts in this area to allow the use of some of these substances, either for personal use or in therapy. Colorado is one that's just getting such a program up and running. Oregon has very recently done this, and it's a little bit farther along. The Oregon voters passed something called Measure 109 in 2020, which established a regulated program in that state to provide access to psilocybin services. And so I've included a couple of links in your memo if you're interested in what Oregon's done. They're just getting that program up and running now. So it's kind of interesting, some of those things to look at. We actually there's a lot of bills at PNA in April, so the Policy and Advocacy Committee didn't discuss this particular bill, but the staff recommendation for today is that the board consider supporting this bill. There is one concern that I believe Christy is going to talk about that she had in a second, that There is some language in the bill under Health and Safety Code 11260A. I believe it's the very last sentence where it says that, once the committee makes these recommendations and the legislature adopts a framework, that the use of the hallucinogenic or psychedelic subjects for psychedelic assisted therapy shall be lawful. And she will point out in a second that may be somewhat misleading to the public, and that maybe better terminology is used, because even if it became lawful under California law, there are certain cases or instances when it's not lawful under federal law. So we don't necessarily want to mislead people into thinking that it's lawful. Just one more note on this bill. A similar sort of broader in scope bill was run last year by Senator Wiener. It was SB 58. It would have decriminalized the use of certain quantities of certain types of these hallucinogenic drugs for age 21 and over, and proposed creating a work group to study and make recommendations. The governor vetoed that bill, but he asked for legislation that it would include therapeutic guidelines for certain psychedelics, and committed to working with the legislature on that. So this bill is one of two that is in response to the governor's veto from last year. This is a 2-year bill that was moving last year too. Unfortunately, the other one is already SB 1012 that we were going to talk about today, died yesterday in appropriations. So this is the one on the table. And I'll turn it over to Christy for a minute before I turn it over for a discussion, so she can make sure that I had fully addressed her concern.
Right. So my main concern is that sentence that Ms. Helms just read about it being lawful is just flat out not accurate. And so I'm concerned that practitioners might be misled into believing that they have immunity if this law is enacted. So in the analysis for this bill, Assembly Third Reading Committee analysis, page 3, it discusses that state authorization does not nullify federal drug laws, and the substances included in this bill remain illegal under federal law. As a result, state authorization for personal possession or for facilities providing these substances would not prevent the federal government from shutting down facilities or provide immunity from federal criminal proceedings if law enforcement was inclined to pursue them. Specifically, we're talking about 21 U.S. Code Section 844 and a variety of federal laws that make it illegal to possess, rent, lease, or provide manufacturing, distributing, or using a controlled substance in violation of federal law. So I think that what we learned from the Compassionate Use Act litigation, which also is a Schedule I drug, these are Schedule I drugs, so they can't be prescribed. That's why it's illegal to use or can possess them, because you can't get prescribed any of these drugs. Possessing or using them are a violation of the federal drug laws. So what we learned with the marijuana litigation involving the Compassionate Use Act is that what the courts upheld was the First Amendment right to recommend the use of these drugs, but it doesn't insulate the practitioner if they use or possess the drug from being criminally prosecuted. What was protected was the speech involved with giving a recommendation that would be beneficial in the therapeutic relationship. So I think if the board is interested in supporting the concept, the recommendation might be to revise the proposed language consistent with Health and Safety Code Section 11362.5, which was the initiative measure, the Compassionate Use Act, and voted by the California voters in 1996. So that I know there's some legal precedent for defending the speech aspect, but to say that it's lawful is misleading people. I think it could potentially be a trap for people that follow and rely on that law and then find out to their detriment that it doesn't protect them from criminal prosecution. So anyway, that was my recommendation on this item.
We can open it up for discussion, Chris, if that's what you want to do.
Okay, does Would anyone like to make a motion based on the staff recommendations? Annette?
I'll make a motion, but I'm going to need some help with the language. I think you said 113625, but I need some help with that because I agree with that.
Right. So I guess the question would be support if amended or oppose unless amended. So what's your strong feeling?
Oppose unless amended.
Oppose unless amended to revise the language mentioned in section 3 of the bill to remove references to the use being lawful and instead make revisions consistent with precedent at Health and Safety Code section 11362.5.
That's what I have written down. So Christina, let me know what you need. So I am making the amendment to, I'm sorry, I'm making the motion.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm saying I'm making the motion to oppose unless amended as stated by
council.
By council. Okay. Is that clear enough to move
Good.
forward? Okay, excellent. So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Go ahead.
Kelly Ronan, Senior Public Member, I'll second.
Excellent. Okay. Discussion. Susan?
I have a question. I thought that what we were talking about was proposing some group to look into these drugs to find out whatever it is we want to find out, that it was, and you're shaking your head, yes.
It does do that, but then I think that what we're talking about, the point of concern is that it then goes on to say that if that work group's recommendations are approved, then something is legal. And it's that particular declaration, which is not necessarily true, that it's because I think the work group, that's great. I don't see any problems there. It's just that we don't want to mislead people.
Okay, so I should understand that anybody in California now who is practicing with these drugs is doing something illegal.
That's what federal law says.
Yeah.
Well, potentially, I mean, if they're charged and, charges are brought. But I guess they're stating and acknowledging in their own analysis that it violates federal law. And if you look up and read it, it's pretty straightforward. And this is the conversations we've had also on medicinal marijuana. It's the same issue because it's both on Schedule 1. So until changes are made at the federal level supersedes and preempts California law in this area. So what I'm recommending is what the courts have said we can do to implement policy if we believe that. And it starts the conversation at the federal level when states start enacting these types of laws. So if you're in support of the policy, one thing you want to do though to protect your practitioners is to let them know that this is how you can proceed in a safer manner to not potentially be prosecuted.
John?
So for myself personally, I would lean more towards a support if amended. For me, the oppose if amended feels like it's making a statement about the investigation of this really powerful psychological tool that there's been lots of studies that are done in the state of California, all over the world, actually. They're saying that it is an amazing way to move forward in providing, especially for PTSD. There's a lot of veterans work with it. We're looking at it as a very powerful trauma-based piece of information and a really great adjunct to the work that therapists are doing. So by putting oppose instead of amended, I think that language almost puts us behind what's actually being seen as progressive in our field, where I would lean more towards support if amended, which says we are supporting this really well-studied information and saying we want to have our practitioners be able to move forward with it, and we have a concern.
Justin?
I agree with everything John just said.
All right. Well, we have a motion on the table. Dr. Walker, would you like to stick with your motion or would you like to amend it?
I'm going to stick with my motion because I'm a public board member. I'm not a licensed. So my point of view is totally different from someone that's practicing. So I'll stand and we'll take the vote and I can accept whatever it comes out to be.
I would like to add to the discussion too.
Okay, go ahead.
No, okay, so I don't know. I guess I'm just more concerned as far as the consumer protection or public safety. I know in the Valley, in Fresno area, we've had the fentanyl has been prescribed and it's been more accessible to people who are unintended. And so, and I know also I've worked in child welfare. So the concern is just making it more available, makes it more accessible for unintended people. So that's all I wanted to share.
Okay, Kelly, and then Nick, and then Justin.
So I support Dr. Walker's motion at this point, and Dr. Walker and I are both public members, and I certainly do not doubt the therapeutic value of cyclobin or the substance that is discussed. And here's why. One, I don't like trigger laws because I think they create a lot of uncertainty. And two, from a public safety perspective, any sort of law enforcement contact related to drugs is always dangerous, regardless. Anytime you have any law enforcement contact going in and making arrests and conducting potentially hostile raids where in a community, that in and of itself is dangerous. Third, lawyers aren't there. I mean, lawyers aren't therapists and therapists aren't lawyers. And there's a lot of legal implications that have not been addressed in the body of education related to this particular legislation that I think therapists would need to know. You know, are you counseling a youth who's on probation? Are you counseling a veteran? Are you counseling someone who has, you know, other legal concerns? There's a lot of ambiguity in this particular legislation, which I think council is concerned with, and that's what I'd say.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, I was just, I think, so I support what John and Justin sort of said before, and I think I would caution such a strong opposition to the motion, given that the legislature does look at what we recommend and what we support and don't support. And my concern is that this legislative cycle ends in August, and if we are taking an opposed position unless amended, there may or may not be time for that to happen between now and the end of August. I think if we considered a support unless amended, we at least have an opportunity to come potentially continue this conversation versus not. I think that's my concern about that. I hear what you're saying, Kelly. I don't disagree with you, Dr. Walker. I definitely understand your concerns, and I don't want to take away from that. But I also understand that that the literature, the research, the field is moving in this direction. We have an opportunity to kind of be at the forefront of what we're doing in the state therapeutically. I mean, even the laws that are passed in Oregon, if you look at the laws written, there's no therapy that's involved in that. It's simply just a facilitated house with unlicensed guides. So this is really an opportunity for California to set precedent in how we utilize these drugs in a way that I think is responsible and beneficial for the patient. So,
Justin.
Yeah, I agree with what Board Member Boyd is saying. I also want to note that the comparison to a spread of fentanyl is sort of misleading, I think, both the board and people hearing this. For those of you maybe unaware of what psilocybin assisted psychotherapy looks like, or ketamine assisted therapy, or psychedelic assisted therapy, it is almost always in a licensed service center for the duration of the administration session. And if you read the materials that we were given, we would see that same thing, that is what Oregon does. I also want to note that this is not saying that support of this is releasing psilocybin onto the masses. This is to support a work group to look into this further. So when we're using the term consumer protection, I'm not sure what a work group, what we're concerned about with them looking into. So again, I want to come back to this idea that there is a tremendous amount of peer-reviewed research that supports this, a tremendous amount. this opposition to this bill would be antithetical to where science is moving, where the field of therapy is moving. Support if amended is saying, yes, we agree that people should continue talking about this, which seems to me like a clear statement that we have, as a board, largely expressed support for in the past, that we support the idea that working groups should be discussing ways to expand therapy and therapeutic services.
Thank you, Justin. John.
And adding on to Justin's statement, we're also looking at, this is the creation of a work group. In that work group, they're going to look at the studies that are out there, the movement of the industry. It also says they're going to create policy moving forward. So it's about looking at the intent of where the state is going to move with this. This is a work group that's saying we're going to examine this really amazing tool belt that can come into the therapeutic world. It's not saying we're going to be handing out drugs like candy on the street corners or in our therapeutic offices. It specifically talks about creating policy around it, creating an agency that will oversee it. So to me, that puts a lot of pieces into the puzzle that says, no, we're not going to be just moving out into encouraging drug use into the community. We're saying we're paying attention to where the field is moving and that we are trying to stay abreast of all of that information. For me also, I believe the idea of saying oppose really supports that kind of very triggered handing out drugs like candy on the corner message, where support says we want our licensees and registrants to be able to move forward in the advancement of the field. And to understand too, that anyone who's practicing it now, they're mostly going through medically assisted therapy trainings. There are organizations that are already doing those types of trainings, and they're really very clear into how the methods are used, how the drugs are used in these situations. So once again, we're not just sending out practitioners with, bags of mushrooms saying, let's get high and do therapy. That's not what this is about. So for me, a support and amended is a position that's really respecting our organizations and our therapists.
That
I appreciate the discussion. I don't want to belabor the issue here because we do have a motion and a second that may not pass, but we're still respecting the process. But I do want to come back to the memo and the summary. Thank you for restating, John, what we're discussing here. The bill would create a work group to study, I understand that, but I also am taking into consideration the seriousness of misleading. Again, Dr. Annette Walker, public member, misleading our consumers and listening to what legal has said. When you look at the context of the language and the wording, saying, is it lawful or is it not? I think we better be very cautious of that. So I stand on what I said, even though I do understand the semantics and the point of view of someone that is actually practicing and working in the field. I'm a public member. So I'll take this vote for the public as a public member on that mark right there. And if the vote doesn't pass, just for those that are listening, the process does allow us to come back and put another motion on the table, but so that we can move on, we can just hopefully vote on my motion.
Thank you, Dr. Walker.
Oh,
All right, any comments from our audience?
I've been looking into this a lot also, and even the Psychotherapy Networker, which is a great magazine in my profession, has been looking at it, and the research is pretty clear that this is incredibly effective. And I want to differentiate between opiates and psychedelics, and that it's helpful to know the Nixon administration wanted to create a lot of Schedule I drugs in order to criminalize the use and incarcerate Black and brown communities and put them into basically slave labor sort of situations. And that got reinforced again during the Reagan administration. So it is part of racism to criminalize the use of drugs, which is a problem in and of itself. And again, we're emphasizing that this is about looking at a work group to research best practices, and everything that I've read so far says that they're spending like a weekend with a practitioner in several health professionals to go through a very specific process in order to use these medications, in my opinion. So I hope that the board will vote for a support if amended, so you can be at the table to take action rather than oppose if amended. And I totally respect Dr. Walker, your position. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Ben Caldwell, MFT. I don't have a particular request in terms of the position that the board chooses to take. Just some confusion about some of the inferences being drawn from the language in the bill. And for that, I would defer to board counsel. It seems to me, not a lawyer, as I'm reading this, that it really is strictly a work group bill. And it does not appear to trigger the automatic legalization in any form. What it says in section 11260 of the current draft is that this would become a legal process upon the legislative enactment of a particular framework, which appears to me to require a separate legislative action after a framework is proposed. It seems to me to be a bill that's then limited in scope really to the creation of the work group to propose a framework that the legislature would still be free to adopt or not adopt based on their judgment at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I see no other comments from our audience in the room. Do we have any comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And it looks like we have a request from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak with a 15-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Thank you, Kathy Atkins with CAMPT. CAMPT is not taking a position on this bill, and similar to Ben's testimony, we're not advocating one way or the other. What I will, as I've been listening to testimony, what I would say is CAMPT, as most of you know, we have a legal line that we receive, hundreds of calls a day on various issues. And I will say this definitely comes up quite a bit. And we get calls ranging from folks who are working in very medically focused, organized facilities where this process and this treatment does seem to be administered very ethically, as well as very concerning calls from therapists who do it outside their office with little to no training, with really horrifying fact patterns attached. The reason I bring that up is I think a work group is a good idea to figure out how to, if the legislator moves forward, do it in a lawful way that benefits and highlights the first group of people that a lot of board members have testified, as well as make sure the folks that are sort of doing it on the fly in their office are not part of that movement forward. And then second, I think I appreciate the board's interest in, regardless of the position they take, bringing up the confusion surrounding F, because as I read it, I'm sitting here reading it too. It is confusing. So what it means. So I think it's great that the board is, whichever position you go with, underscoring the clarification of F as part of this work group. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there's no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Christina, would you take the vote?
Yes. Dr. Nick Boyd,
No.
Abigail Ortega,
I am recusing myself from this vote.
Justin Huff,
No.
Chris Jones,
No.
Wendy Strack,
No.
John Sovek,
No.
Susan Friedman,
No.
Kelly Ranasinga,
Yes.
Dr. Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
So, you know what, I'm sorry, can you repeat what the vote is? Because I know there was a change, I mean, what the proposal was,
The motion,
the motion.
The motion is to oppose unless amended.
Okay. All right, so I'm actually going to abstain.
and the motion does not carry.
We have another, we put another. So do we have an amended motion for the board? I saw Justin's hand first.
I motion to amend if supported.
Amend.
Support if amended.
Amended.
Yes, I motion to support if amended. Thank you.
Do we have a second?
And just for clarification, the amendments would involve either revising the sections relating to the statements about being unlawful or even removing them altogether. So the focus of the bill is just on the development of the task force or work group.
Yes, excellent.
Thank you. Any further discussion from the board?
Just real quick, can we clarify if we're motioning to remove the language altogether or to modify it? Because I think that's different.
We're recommending to the authors those two things, either to amend the language or to
Okay,
remove
so
that.
either or.
Either or, correct?
Right, yeah. So I think when we do an amended position, we have to tell them what we think the amendments should be.
Okay.
We can't just say support if amended. They'll ask us what those amendments are. So that's what I was trying to. So I think in consideration of the public comment, another option would be just to remove the statements of declaratory statements about things being lawful until we're at the point where there's going to be a legislative enactment, because otherwise it is confusing the record as to what it means and why it's even in there if that's not the law that we're planning to implement.
And then our attorney and Roseanne would
Yes.
discuss with the
It'll be a support if amended to revise or remove the statement regarding about the use being lawful. And if it's to revise, then we'll work with Christy. It'll be something about along the lines of revising to use legal precedent as established by HSC 11362.5.
Right.
Thank you. Further discussion? Discussion from sorry, Annette?
Yes, Dr. Annette Walker, public member. I just want to say I appreciate the clarification from our legal counsel as well as the public comments because it makes it clear what the board is considering. And we, again, in protecting the consumers' rights and helping them to understand the business that we're doing is that we are addressing the lawfulness and addressing the misleading or interpretation of the wording and language here. So I do appreciate that the amended vote was open to addressing that issue because that's what we're here to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments from our present audience? Any further comments from our remote audience?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Christina, would you please take the vote?
Dr. Nick Boyd,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Recusing myself.
abstaining.
No, I am recusing myself.
A recusal takes you out of the conversation and you
Yes.
did
Yes.
give comments.
I did not give a comment.
Justin Huft,
Yes.
Chris Jones,
Yes.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
John Sovek,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
Yes.
Kelly Ranasinga,
No.
Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe,
Abstain.
and motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda, item number 21, discussion and possible action regarding Assembly Bill 1991, Bonta licensee and registrant records. Roseanne.
AB 1991 would require healing arts boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs to collect specified data from licensees and registrants at renewal. It would, under current law, we have several data collection mechanisms that are in place. There's something called the Department of Healthcare Access Information, which you may be aware of, HCAI. It's established as the state's healthcare workforce and research data center, and it's intended to serve as the state's central source of healthcare workforce data and educational data. And they collect, analyze, and distribute information on employment and education trends for the healthcare occupations. HCAI works with the licensing boards and the Employment Development Department to collect data on the supply of healthcare workers by specialty, their geographic distribution, their diversity, current and forecasted demand, and educational capacity. And you started to see, we've included in a few past board meetings, some of the work that HCAI is starting to put out. HCAI also runs numerous scholarship and loan repayment programs, which is based on this data, with the purpose of providing scholarship and loans to students from underrepresented groups who are pursuing healthcare professions as a career. Specifically for this board, there is a licensed mental health service provider education program, provides grants to licensed mental health service professionals who provide direct patient care in publicly funded facilities or mental health shortage areas to reimburse their educational loans. And there's other programs that HCI administers for other healthcare professions like doctors, things like that. And so HCAI works with DCA to collect certain data about our licensing population, typically upon renewal. There's a few boards that are required to collect the data, at least biannually, typically at renewal. That's the Board of Registered Nursing, Vocational Nursing, Psychiatric Technicians, and the Physician Assistant and Respiratory Care boards. All other healing arts boards, including this board, must request this workforce data from the licensees and registrants at renewal, but they are not permitted to require it. And the data collected, I've included there's a long list in my analysis. Things like practice area or specialty, where they are located, anticipated year of retirement, gender identity, languages spoken, race or ethnicity, employer classification, where are they working, work hours, sexual orientation, disability status. So it's quite a long list. So we are required to request it. They have the option when they're renewing, they get a survey. It's made clear that it's confidential. And then they can choose whether or not to answer each question. DCA must keep that information confidential. It can only be released in aggregated form, and it can't be used to identify an individual. But like I said, they're not required to provide it if they don't feel comfortable doing that. So this bill would require healing arts boards to collect the data rather than requiring that they request it. It specifies that the data must be provided as a condition of license or registration renewal. And it removes the statement in law that they cannot be subject to disciplinary action for not providing it. However, a recent amendment specifies that a board cannot deny a renewal solely because a licensee or registrant failed to provide the data. So the author's office is stating that the bill will provide HCAI with more accurate information necessary to determine whether or not their loan repayment programs they administer are having the intended effect, and it will just allow them to have more accurate numbers. So that way they can make sure that their programs are working as intended and providing the best information possible. Requiring the data would provide a more accurate picture of the demographics of the board's licensee or registered population. However, the discussions kind of focus on this bill on what that should be weighed along with the knowledge that some applicants may be uncomfortable answering certain demographic questions. For various reasons. And I actually asked HCAI if they could provide for some of our board, if they could provide for which questions, for which topic areas, what the percentage of decline to states was. And so if you have a specific one on the list that you want to know, just some of the ones that of note, for ethnicity, about 12% of licensees and about 10% of registrants declined to state. Race, about 15% of licensees and 16% of registrants. Let's see. The ones that were kind of high, a lot of people declined on retirement, about 25% to 28%. I'm conjecturing that that's because maybe they don't know. Sexual orientation, about 22% of licensees and about 19% of registrants declined. And disability status, about 23% of licensees and 24% of registrants declined to state. So that kind of gives you an idea. If there's another particular one you're curious about, you can let me know. So the Policy and Advocacy Committee discussed this bill at its meeting last month and opted not to recommend a position, but asked staff to contact the author's office to determine if they would be willing to make some of the more sensitive questions optional instead of required. And so what the author's office did since the P&A committee is they have offered an amendment. They've amended the bill. It specifies that the board cannot deny a renewal solely because they failed to provide the data. So they loosened it up a little, but it's still, I mean, the statement in law that they can't be subject to discipline is still removed, but it just doesn't say anything about discipline. It just says you can't fail to renew. So staff recommends that the board consider taking a support position on this bill just because it would give some data that's necessary, but I'll open it up for discussion now.
Do we have a motion from the board at this point
I'll make a motion to accept staff's recommendation.
to support yeah. We have a motion to support. Is there a second? I will second. I don't know, did I miss? No. I didn't see her, sorry. All right, discussion? Susan?
Wouldn't it make sense to write something when people are renewing their application to explain why this information is being requested? I mean, it just says it's being requested for workforce planning or something. I mean, couldn't it be made more specific why they're asking this? Because the questions that we really want answered are the ones people aren't answering.
So by law, the Information Practices Act requires every form in which government collects personal information like this to disclose the authority for the collection of the information, which would be this statute, and the reason and the purpose and what we plan to do with the information. So all of that information is currently provided to everyone that applies on a voluntary basis. I don't think this bill would change it because if we can't not renew and discipline, then it's still a voluntary process. So that still would be disclosed to them, what the purpose is. And I think that in the past, we've come up with language to say that, this will help with workforce development and planning. So we encourage you to respond. And I don't know if this is also in there, but the way that we currently collect information is we separate it from the application. So it's anonymized and aggregated. So people would maybe be less concerned about answering the question because the board wouldn't retain their particular answer. It goes to a separate agency for analysis and workforce development planning. So, but by law, we do have to tell them all of that information.
Okay, Susan? Yeah, I'm asking if you were satisfied with that response. Okay, what else would you, I can see the look in your face, so I want to know what your other question is.
Well, the reason I'm not satisfied with that is because, of course, we all know you can't ask those kinds of questions. This is going to allow them to ask those kinds of questions. But I think that people are always suspicious, even if you say to them, it's going to be protected and nobody will see it, or
well,
who believes that?
Susan, we can't go on what people may think or suspect. We have to go on what we have written into legislation.
So it's actually a misdemeanor to require them to answer the question.
Right.
We can only ask for their voluntary disclosure of the information, and we have to separate it from the application currently. So this would not change that process. And that's my read of it anyway.
Well, just to let you know, we did send out some kind of a questionnaire, I think, with the telehealth. Remember, during telehealth, we sent out a questionnaire, and I think we got like maybe 1,200 people who responded, but that was out of, 142,000. So I don't know what that means.
Wendy.
I just have a question. So it was kind of along the lines of what you were saying. So even if this is technically required, it's still optional for them to do it. But then within the survey, like once is it an all or nothing? Like if you do the survey, you have to answer all the questions or you don't participate at all. Can you skip questions and still submit?
I don't know about the implementation piece.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't go into that right now. It's not all or nothing so that you can skip question. I believe you can't skip, but you can say decline to state. So I would imagine that it would, the language on the request would be a little bit more required. It would probably, the language would probably be beefed up but with that particular amendment that they made, I mean, the board can't deny it. So there would likely have to, I don't know how HCI would design the actual survey, but there would have to be some sort of an out if somebody didn't want to, and we wouldn't be able to deny it. So there'd have to be a way for them to renew still. We couldn't deny a renewal. My guess is it would probably be a little bit less easy to skip over some of the survey.
That works, because then for questions that are particularly sensitive, they still have the ability to not share the information.
It appears that way, yes.
John, did you have? Oh, I thought you had. Any other board discussion? Any comments from our participants in the room? Any comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and with the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. And Christina, would you please take the vote?
Start on the other end. Dr. Annette Walker,
Yes.
Kelly Ranasinga,
Yes.
Susan Friedman,
No.
John Sovek,
No.
Wendy Strack,
Yes.
Chris Jones,
Yes.
Justin Huff,
Yes.
Abigail Ortega,
Yes.
Dr. Nick Boyd,
Yes.
Eleanor Uribe.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 23, is the discussion and possible action regarding Assembly Bill 2270. Mainshine, did I get that wrong? Manshine?
Mainshine.
Mainshine? 22 has been removed from, sorry, is it not it?
So
That's what you wrote on my script.
22.
Is the prison and mental health?
yes, I'll just give let me just say that item we were going
I'm
to
sorry.
discuss item 22 today, AB 2142, which is prisons mental health was the subject. That bill actually was held in appropriations committee yesterday, which means that it died. So we will not be discussing that bill today.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Oh.
We will not be discussing it because it is, we'll send, and John would like us to send flowers, so we'll do that. So we're going to move on to agenda item number 23, which is discussion and possible action regarding Assembly Bill 2270, Mainshine, Healing Acts, Continuing Education, Menopausal Mental Health, and Physical Health. Roseanne, the floor is yours.
Thanks. So AB 2270 would require the board to consider including a course in menopausal mental or physical health in its continuing education requirements. And so right now the board has various continuing education requirements. We're required to prescribe components for mandatory continuing education by the Business and Professions Code to enhance public protection. The licensees of our board, when they renew their license, they need to certify that they have completed at least 36 hours of approved continuing education in or relevant to their field of practice in the past 2 years. Of that 36 hours, 6 of those hours are required to be continuing education taken in the subject of law and ethics. Continuing education must be taken from specified providers as provided in the board's regulations, and they must pertain to either aspects of the discipline that are fundamental to the understanding or practice of the profession, aspects of the discipline for which license where significant recent developments have occurred, or aspects of other disciplines that enhance the understanding or practice of their profession. And so in this particular bill, it would state that the board must simply consider including a course in menopausal mental or physical health as required as part of its required CE requirements. It also provides a similar requirement. The bill would also basically apply to Medical Board of California, Board of Registered Nursing, Board of Psychology, and the Physician's Assistant Board. The author's office is running this bill because of a concern about lack of knowledge in the general population and training in medical schools regarding menopause. They believe that that requiring this coursework would bring awareness to those issues that those experiencing menopause face. The board's licensing laws already permit continuing education that is relevant or in the practice of the profession. So the board would currently accept a course in menopausal mental health toward continuing education requirements. And I have done a sort of precursory search, and there are courses, just in a quick search, I found a few courses that are out there. And so if somebody were to take one of those because they felt it was relevant to their practice, then we would accept that. So just kind of a note on adding continuing education requirements, we always have kind of in the past approached this with caution because there's an extremely wide variety of continuing education courses available to the board licensees, covering a wide range of topics and specialties. And aside from requiring the California Law and Ethics course, the board typically, its stance in the past has been to leave it to the licensee to determine what course CE topics are the most relevant and beneficial to them in their particular practice. So the board should consider whether requiring or encouraging certain courses that are already acceptable in law raises the question of whether other courses covering other topics should also be listed in law as well. So just that's one point of thought. The bill specifies, this particular bill specifies the board must consider including a course in menopausal mental or physical health in its CE requirements. Of course, mental and physical health can be interrelated, but it's debatable whether a course that solely covered menopausal physical health with no inclusion of mental health would be relevant to the practice of the board's professions. The Policy and Advocacy decided not to recommend a position to the board after its discussion in April. Staff recommends the board consider just continuing to watch this bill. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
Do we have a motion on the floor based on staff recommendations? Wendy.
Make the motion.
Wendy. What's your motion?
I'll make the motion to, I guess, do you need a motion?
To watch?
To watch it?
No motion.
No, we don't
here
need
to
a motion.
Okay.
Never mind.
I'd like to make a motion to oppose this bill. If we entertain every special interest in this board, we'd entertain all sorts. I think, there's constantly going to be an interest for continuing education. And I think taking that position helps us really define that it's up to the license holder to let them decide what they need to do. There's certain things that we need to consider, but I don't know that this is one of those.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right,
This is Eleanor Irby.
Eleanor seconded the motion. Any discussion from the further discussion from the board? Any just, Wendy, go ahead.
Just following up from the Policy and Advocacy Committee discussion on this, I think there was a lot of discussion about the importance of the topic, but also a concurrent understanding that we're also, as part of the Workforce Development Committee, looking at doing a comprehensive review of all the CE requirements to make sure that they're up to date and what we're requiring is still relevant and up to date. So supporting additional CEs kind of in the time when we're doing this review process is probably not the optimal timing, but I don't think the discussion and my colleagues can jump in went so far as to be opposed to it. We recognize the importance of the topic, but this maybe just isn't the right time for the consideration.
Thank you. Annette.
Yes, thank you. Speaking of timing, thank you, Wendy. I'll segue from your comments and just build or add to it that given this current state of our societal culture, if you will, we are being transparent about addressing both the mental and physical aspects of menopause. So it's a necessary. So I wouldn't go so far to oppose it, because similar to a previous conversation we just had on another situation when we're looking at forward progress. This is where we're going. And again, I believe we're looking at establishing considerations after reviewing overall CE, continuing ed courses and things like that. So again, this is an exploration, for lack of better words, so I wouldn't oppose it.
I agree with that. I don't, sorry, go ahead, Councilor. Sorry.
I just want to point out that the bill says shall consider. So that doesn't mean you have to do it. So you could put it on an agenda, have a discussion, decide not to. So I don't know if it's a mandate that you have to have dedicated CE in this area. It says shall consider it.
Okay, I must have.
So I just want to point out that it doesn't actually mandate that you have to make dedicated CE in that area.
Got it.
That's my read anyway. I don't know if Roseanne, did you have a different?
Med Board has a, we're going to talk about a bill next where Med Board already has the language and they have not adopted so you don't have to. It's just encouraging the board to consider. And the board could find as part of its workforce development, that the court, it's better, the topic is better, may possibly, I don't know, be better addressed in coursework rather than CE.
I agree with you, Nick, on mandating. If we mandate one, then we open the door and we mandate all. I like leaving it up for an option. I think it's an important topic, but I think that there needs to be some level of choice also in that. Did you want to stick with your motion?
So just, I guess I missed that language being shall consider. If it's an optional consideration, I will withdraw my motion. I misunderstood that. I was under the impression it was a mandated. And that was my concern, is that, we definitely have important CEUs and there's a reason for that, but we also need to be mindful of what we're burdening our license holders with in terms of continuing education.
All right, so your motion is withdrawn. Eleanor, did you want to make a motion, being that you were the person that seconded?
I also understood it as being required, so I agree with what was just shared.
Okay, thank you. So then the position of the board at this point is that we agree that we're going to continue to watch the bill. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Are there comments from our audience?
Thea Brew, speaking as an educator for LMFTs and LPCCs, and someone who reviews coursework for other programs as a subject matter expert. Both the LMFT and LPC, I can't speak for the other two professions, require aging and I guess all four require aging and long-term care. And it would seem remiss that menopause wouldn't be discussed in some way, at least a mental health aspect of it as part of that. So I think that probably if you were to do a survey, you would find that 90% of the programs are already covering this information. I personally would like the board to consider oppose because even though the language is not that it says shall and rather than or shall consider rather than just shall. I think it's important for us to make a statement that we already have, like my program is 63 units. There's already 60 units required. There's so much information. And then CEUs, if I'm as a supervisor and having to do in law and ethics, I'm already 24 units every year or every cycle that I have to renew, which gives me, or 12 units. So that reduces me and what other courses that I can take. And if I'm specializing in working with children, it seems completely irrelevant for me to spend my time there. I should be spending my time learning about working with children. So my hope is that you would have a stronger position of oppose, and I understand if you're going to watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from our participants?
Thank you. Ben Caldwell, MFT. I also would respectfully request the board oppose this bill and the next one on the agenda as well. As staff noted, clinicians can already receive CE credit for content in this area. If the BBS is of the opinion that this content should be mandatory, then it should be built into the curriculum requirements for qualifying degrees. While this bill would just have the BBS consider a requirement and the BBS could still say no, in general, it's not a good practice to allow educational content to be dictated from external interests rather than coming up through the relevant professions or the board itself. This bill would thus set a poor precedent. And as Board Member Strack noted, educational requirements should be approached comprehensively and not in a piecemeal manner. This is not a statement about the importance of the topic itself, but rather about the process. I'd request that you take an opposed position. Thank you.
Thank you.
GV Ayers representing CalPIC. We do not have an official position on the bill. However, we tend to echo the sentiments that Dr. Caldwell and Dr. Brew has expressed.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon or use the raise hand function. All right, and we have a request from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak and a 15-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Hi, Kathy Atkins with CAMFT. I don't need to reiterate what the 4 presenters said before me, but CAMFT generally holds the same position as has been presented by the other associations and would have the same ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, because there's no further requests, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. We appreciate the comments from our participants. As a board, we will continue to watch the vote or watch the bill and keep your comments in consideration as we move forward. Right? We're not voting because we're just watching. Excellent. Unless they're sorry. Right. Okay. Perfect. All right. And we're going to move on to our next item, which is item number 24. Discussion and possible action regarding Assembly Bill 2581, Mainshine, Healing Acts, Continuing Education, Mental Health, Maternal Mental Health. Roseanne.
So this bill is very similar to the one we just discussed. It would require the board to consider, and it's a shall consider, not shall. So to consider including a course in maternal mental health in its CE requirements. And the intent of the author for this bill is that they state maternal mental health conditions are the leading cause of pregnancy-related deaths, and that providing coursework on this topic would provide information to medical and mental health providers about how to appropriately treat their affected clients. Like I said before, the board's licensing laws would already permit this type of continuing education coursework that was relevant to the practice of the profession. we discussed the bill at the Policy and Advocacy Committee in April. The committee decided not to recommend a position to the board. The staff is recommending just the board just watching this bill. I did, medical board had a very similar bill to this come into effect for them in 2019. It was AB 845 by the same author, required the Medical Board of California to consider including this coursework in their CE requirements for physicians and surgeons. I spoke to my counterpart there. They have not adopted this at this time, and they don't have any current plans to, is what they stated. So I will open it up for discussion.
The staff recommendation is to watch as the previous bill, or is there a motion on the floor that would be different than staff recommendation?
Well, I support this because to me, this is a different type of situation where like there's death involved if someone is not well trained. I mean, that's really what the issue is and why it's being brought so heavily, is that women's issues in general are not taken with the same weights. We're being misdiagnosed. There's just a lot that is of people that are falling through the cracks inside of just women's mental health in general. And in this situation, it's a parent and an infant, right? That can potentially, well, that's at stake, you know. And like just hearing a comment from that I just heard, and I've heard about, well, you know, the bill doesn't really, if you work with a child, it doesn't really impact, and like, that's so far from the truth. If you work with children, you work with parents, and you actually do assessments with the parents because it's a co-regulation. There's just so much involved in that relationship. And so I'm glad that at least the medical board is looking at it. I'm not sure what's there. I'm curious to hear more about that. But yeah, I know there was a lot of attention during our Policy and Advocacy Committee from the public. There were several people that actually came and shared what they've been through. So, you know, this is major.
You can make a motion if you'd like,
Yeah,
Abigail.
yeah, I do. I would like to make a motion to in support of this bill, right? That we consider it. And yeah, basically.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Is there a second? Second? Eleanor, no? All right, we do not have a second on the floor or on the board, so the motion does not move forward. Any further discussion from the board?
I would just, this is Eleanor Uribe. I would just want to say I do believe, yes, this is very important. It could affect individual couples, families. My only concern is that if we mandate it, what about for the person working like with incarcerated males? So so the important thing is just relevance. So, but I think maybe even health might, and then part of sections of that could be maternal, males, females, or everyone. So.
Thank you, Eleanor. Any further discussion from the board?
I just want to answer that. Inside of my mental health training, I learned about paternal depression and anxiety. That is actually like wherever you see a woman that is suffering, there's also a male, but they exhibit their symptoms very differently. And I think everyone is impacted, whether they're aware of it or not. It's so prevalent. It's 1 in every 5. People are dealing with this. Those are families. That's a huge percentage of the population. And the men are underdiagnosed. They are underdiagnosed. We don't even know how many.
Thank you, Abigail. I remember from our policy and advocacy, I mean, you're very passionate about this and I appreciate that. And so, you know, we will continue watching and we definitely want your voice here.
Yeah, and are we going to hear from the public?
We are. I'm going to move to them next. All right. We have comments from our audience.
Hi, my name is Daniela Bermudez, MFT. I'm a board member of the California chapter of Postpartum Support International, and today I'm representing the organization along with support from fellow California perinatal mental health nonprofits, Maternal Mental Health Now, Return to Zero Hope, Postpartum Health Alliance, and Love Dad. During the BBS subcommittee last month, we heard comments about AB 2581 that perinatal mental health, so from preconception to 1 year postpartum, is considered a specialty and not a value as continuing education requirement by the board. We respectfully disagree and would like to emphasize that perinatal mental health is a consumer safety issue. Perinatal mental health disorders are not being recognized and assessed properly by social workers, licensed professional counselors, marriage and family therapists, resulting in deaths, unnecessary preventable deaths. Nima Bakta, Orange County, 2020. Holly Marie Bloom, a therapist from Napa in 2023. Brenda Encarnacion from Valencia, 2021. Brianna Renshaw, San Diego, 2013. Charlene Ventimilla, Long Beach, 2016. These are California cases that made headlines from dying from perinatal mental health illness. All of these people left behind children under the age of 1. We are asking the BBS to require basic training be part of licensing and license renewals so providers know how to recognize the unique components of postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, how to differentiate between postpartum OCD and postpartum psychosis, and the difference between baby blues and postpartum depression. Our organization provided this body with fact sheets about perinatal and maternal mental health crisis in this state. National averages of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders are 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 3 in other areas in California. 1 in 10 dads and birth partners struggle too. This is not only a cisgendered woman's issue. We have an average of 400,000 births per year in California. That's 800,000 parents potentially impacted each year, 800,000 consumers. Please, we urge you to consider requiring mental health CEUs. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Any other comments from the audience?
Hello, Shanti Ezrin with CAMPT. Really appreciate the conversation here and just wanted to echo the public comments that were made on the previous bill. CAMPT generally opposes any additional CEs for all the reasons that were previously given. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an important topic, and I'm disappointed that there are programs who aren't already talking about this as part of their educational requirements. The bill unfortunately just says shall consider, and the BBS already does. So the way the language is for this particular bill, I am also would recommend continuing to watch, if not oppose. But the information is important, and I would recommend your organization take it to make it a requirement to be covered in their education rather than an extra CEU, because this should be in a DSM class. It should be in a human development class. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience?
GV Ayers representing CalPIC. We do not have a position on the bill, but we tend to not be in favor of bills which have specificity such as this for CE.
Thank you. All right. No further comments from our audience? Any comments from our remote participants?
This is the moderator. We've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Either use the Q&A button or raise hand. And it looks like we have a request from Kathy Atkins. Kathy, you'll be given 2 minutes to speak and a 15-second warning.
Hi, Kathy Atkins from CAMPT. Shanti really highlighted the position we're coming from and our general belief, our general positions of opposed on additional CEs. Typically, CAMPT is in favor of a holistic and routine assessment of what our MFTs and other providers are taught in the schools. If there is something that is not fully touched on by the educational programs, that is a concern, and that is something that should be reviewed by the schools and the BBS for consumer protection. Also, as landscapes change, telehealth, technology, things like that was not on our radar 20 years ago. Those are the kinds of things that, of course, schools and consumer protection bodies should be looking at so we can do best by our providers and our patients. So I appreciate when there are areas that may be under taught, but I think the assessment needs to be holistic by the schools and the BBS to ensure proper education. And also with the CE, you're only educating people after they're licensed versus when they're practicing in practicum, when they're practicing as trainees, when they're practicing as associates, which can be 10 years. So to me, grabbing people years after they've been practicing is not the solution. If there's a deficit, it needs to be in the educational program, be it this or any other kind of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears we have no further requests on WebEx. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you, moderator. All right, and being that we do not have a motion on the floor, Kelly.
I just wanted to say I appreciated the first public comment. I thought that was very helpful in my decision making.
Thank you. So we will continue to watch this bill. And with that, we have a pretty robust next agenda item. So we're going to take our lunch break at this point. So we will come back at, call it 12:45. See you guys in an hour.